Hello again, everybody, and hi, Karen. I'm Annette. So Sarah has asked me to talk about birth advocacy and the role of birth doulas, which I'm like a couple other folks have said I could probably talk all day about. So I get pretty worked up and passionate about it, but I'm just gonna be a little brief. And if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna throw these dogs outside. I will be back in 1 second. So sorry, 1 second. So they now have a 15-minute timeout. So doula, so I want to talk about kind of the original definition of doula. So doula is a Greek word that means woman servant. And I've always found that pretty fascinating, but also pretty basic. And what I like to think about and what I talk with folks about is thinking about a servant in, it tends to have a negative connotation, but I like to think about it in a positive way in terms of a visual of having someone who is a servant to someone with that kind of a connection where you are just literally observing and watching, and maybe if you want to think about it in kind of old times or even biblical times, your mistress, and just being present to instinctively know what she needs, or be able to hear or see or read what she needs, and to respond to that in a way that is helpful from the person's viewpoint of whom you're trying to serve. So those are kind of the things that I like to think about in terms of doula, and that would, to me, that would be related to both birth or postpartum. And I want to kind of, in thinking about that as a basic definition of a doula, I want to refer to Doulas' definition of doula, and this is straight from their website: a trained professional who provides continuous physical, emotional, and informational support to a mother before, during, or shortly after childbirth to help her achieve the healthiest, most satisfying experience possible. And I kind of touched on that a little bit before in speaking, but I want to start out with kind of advocacy for birth. And why I think that is so important, and this connects with the doula world, is talking about this satisfying experience, because I'm a little saddened by the overwhelming number of people that are either fearful of or have negative memories of and negative experiences of their births. And it's a shame, because it is such an impactful time in your life. And it might be one day, but that birth will stay with you forever. And I always tell people, you can ask a 90-something-year-old woman to tell you her birth stories, and she will tell you in great detail about that day in her life. It's just something that is impactful for you as a woman, your strength, your mothering, your confidence, your connection to your baby and whoever might be with you. Just kind of your tapping in with that inner strength that you have. There are just amazing things that can happen for you throughout this mysterious journey of birth, and no matter how it goes. So I think that there is just such a wonderful opportunity for it to be something positive. And that doesn't mean pain-free. That doesn't mean it's not difficult. And of course, we can all go on about the most difficult and challenging things in our lives being the most stretching, and being things that grew us the most and became vital in our sort of travels in life. So, but I do think that it's certainly very, very possible to have positive experiences. And so I think that advocating for birth is so important, in that we talk to each other and build each other up, like in many areas of life, and talk about the possibilities of support and help and reaching out, and to break some of this chain of isolation. I think we all tend to live in isolation. Of course, it's worse these days, but even before the pandemic issues, we kind of retreat, into our own little thing. Well, my family is the most important. My husband, that's all I need. We're going to have this. We want it to be private. I'm a private person. Those are all kind of romantic notions, but they don't tend to be realistic in terms of these major life events. And I think that's interesting. We've touched a little bit on the postpartum period as well, and how important it is to be connected and to just be able to reach out to somebody for just whether it's the tiniest bit of support or a huge amount of support. And it can just make a world of difference in our lives and in our mental health and in our family health and in what we're teaching and how we're growing our children as well. So I think I encourage you all to talk about resources and what's available and how you feel about birth and the positives of it. And one thing I particularly like to do is when I hear women kind of doing this, sharing the horror stories and the negativity, and they love to give the advice of whatever it is, but I'll pick a little bit on the women who like to say, oh, it's crazy to think, good, get the epidural. You're crazy to want to experience anything, any pain or this or that. Or I think that is fine for some people, but what I try to just step in and say, did you have anybody who was trying to encourage you not to do it the way you did it? And how did that make you feel? Because often women don't realize that they're doing the exact same thing in reverse. So I'm fine. You decide what you need and what's okay for you. And as your labor and birth go along, there are many decisions to be made. And in the end, if you feel good about all that, I'm happy, you're happy, it's a good thing. Don't try to convince other women that your way is the way for them. So that's something that I just think, as far as advocacy, I would love to encourage you all just in your circles so that other people in their circles can just open minds a little bit and try to consider birth as a normal, natural, wonderful part of life and not something to be dreaded and feared and something that is, just something to get through. So that's kind of my little thing on the advocacy of birth, and it can be a wonderful experience. And so I hope that we'll start sharing those things and sharing that it's the beginning of a fantastically amazing time. So some of the interesting things that I always like to tell folks too, as far as doula advocacy and kind of what a doula is and is supposed to do. And this, the DONA definition kind of resonates with me pretty much, because when I'm talking with someone, I'll say, my job is to help you have the best experience possible for you. So we will see what that is together, and I will help you walk through that together. But it's not about me. It's not about what I think. It's not about my vision for it. It's your birth. It's your family. I want you to look back and say, I feel good about the decisions I made, and I feel good about, how I felt during it, and I felt loved and safe and cared for and supported. And I always tell people, you never know how your labor is going to go. Somebody mentioned about every child is different with the breastfeeding. Every labor is different. I don't care how many you've had. They're different in some way or another. So someday, sometimes I support women strictly by answering their questions the entire time, or strictly by answering their partner's questions the entire time. Some of them, it's in physical support the entire time. Usually it's a mix, but just having someone who's a constant and someone who is there to support, first of all, to instinctively kind of know what you need and to work with you that way, and to be able to support you in how you need, depending on how your labor is going. But there is certainly evidential support and studies. I thought a most recent study, actually published by the NIH, talked about having support for your labor and birth, more likely to have a spontaneous vaginal birth. You're less likely to have analgesia, less likely to report any dissatisfaction, less likely to have a cesarean or instruments or low APGAR scores, more likely to have shorter labor, even, of course, also supported in a recent ACOG press release, all these. So there's plenty of support, scientific studies and support for the presence of for support through labor and birth. So as far as the role of the birth doula, and so I'm basically kind of mixing some of this up, but the role is to provide and what you need. And it's very difficult really to talk to folks, and because you don't know what you're going to need at the time. So I always say to people, when you're thinking about this, what you want is a great plan and to set yourself up for success, but to build in lots of flexibility. So when you're facing a huge challenge, what would you normally do? You would research, you would say, well, what are my options and how can I best put in place some things that will help me succeed at whatever it is I'm attempting to do. And so I think that having a entertaining idea of having a birth doula is a huge way to help give yourself an opportunity to get the things you want. Everybody has a vision of the birth that they're hoping for and the birth that whoever's going to be with you is hoping for. And I'm talking beyond healthy baby, of course, you're already, so it's kind of similar to that. You're setting yourself up, you're choosing your healthcare, you're looking at diet and nutrition and exercise and all these things, and how can I have a healthy pregnancy and how can I build up to this birth, same kinds of things. And continuing into your postpartum, how can I support myself? What can I put around me? What kind of people, what kind of love, what kind of information? What do I need to get where I want to go? So what are your goals? Where are you trying to be? How do you then build your team and build your sort of world around that for your success? And that to me is basically, the role of the birth doula, and then continuing into, the days and weeks and months after. It's really just, like I said, just setting yourself up for success that way. I just too wanted to touch on a couple of quick things, just tips if you are thinking about a doula or looking for a doula. I do find it very important, if you can, to meet with some people beforehand and find somebody who you click with. What's going to be your style of communication so that you can work well together? And that's for whoever's going to be with you as well. To think about, like, what are your goals and beliefs, and do they match the doula's goals and beliefs? You don't necessarily want, let's say you're someone who, like, I just want to get into active labor so that I can, get my epidural at a decent time, that it doesn't slow me down and mess up a lot of process. You don't then want to hire a doula who is granola doula, like we like to say, who is all about, nope, I'm completely drug free and I want to push you. And, so you want to make sure that your goals and your beliefs match up. And of course, could be the flip of that. And just someone who has kind of, and I always tell women, look, you have great intuition about yourself, about your body, about your baby. You already have all these things. Use your intuition about who you want to be with you. It is a sensitive time, and you don't want to walk into that with somebody that you maybe already had like I'm not sure feeling about. So, ideally interview some folks. That is not, it's not the be all to end all. I've walked into many, many labors when I worked for a hospital program. I had never met the people, and it always went fantastically. But that's, you're kind of more open to it at the time. So it sort of depends on who you're hiring and for what purposes. But so that was a lot in a really quick, sort of brief time, but I'm 2 minutes. So perfect. I would love to open it up to hear if anybody has any comments or certainly any questions any more about advocacy or the role of the birth doula.
Yeah, anybody can feel free to unmute and talk to Annette or anybody if you feel.
Any questions in particular about birth doulas or looking for one, or how, any thoughts about, anybody having any thoughts there?
I was going to ask, how do you think the pandemic has affected birth doulas and working in, whether it be a hospital birth or home birth or something like that? What is the best way to deal with wanting to have a doula and also have a birth in a pandemic where doulas might not be allowed to be with you yet?
Yes. Yeah, that has really been, of course, a huge challenge. I haven't really done much. I did help one woman, and we were just on the phone. Now, this was a second baby for her, and I was able to be at her first birth, so that helped a lot. And I really had I mentioned before, I'm not a great online person with this, pandemic, but it was much better than I thought it would be. And I've also been able to work with some people postpartum via video. It was not nearly as difficult as I thought. It's obviously not ideal, but it's doable. And I've read some articles about it, and women are creative, and we're finding ways, to do it regardless, because it's just needed. I know even here, and Maryland is a tough place to be a doula on it, to be honest. It's not, different areas, we're very medical area. We have Hopkins, we have a lot of, big medical institutions. We're highly, birth here is highly medical. So it's a little tough actually, but some of the hospitals here have already opened back up to having a doula, a support person come in addition to the spouse or whoever partner is with the woman. So I think that's fantastic news that that's starting. But I would still say, for me, I have talked to people and said, well, let's work at home. At least we can work together at home with some, of course, precautions. And then I'll shift over to video or phone with you. It's going to depend on what, people are looking for as well. But I'm hoping we're at the tail end of that. And now that hospitals are opening back up for that it's going to be less of an issue. But certainly, pre-birth preparation is important as well. So that can be, a lot of that work can be done too, and a lot of that support too. So, it's not, unfortunately, it is not going to be as helpful, because I think a lot of it is very physical usually, but it can be done. So, never say don't, right? Just tell me how I can't do something, and then I'll do it twice and take a selfie, right? Isn't that the new phrase?
Yeah.
Great question.
All right, well, thank you so much for being here and for speaking, and it's great advocacy and everything, and it's so important to, I know that it's hard to advocate for yourself in birth and situation. It's a situation where you feel so vulnerable, and there's a lot going on, and you might not be able to advocate for yourself. So having somebody there who understands you and advocate for you is really important. I want to share a quick personal anecdote. Mom, I don't know when this is, you have a better idea of that, but I specifically remember a client when I was young, a client that you had, and she was a teenage mother, and I remember you coming home and telling me the story about, since she was so young, nobody was listening to her. Like, her parents were trying to control the birth, the doctors were trying to control the birth, and nobody was listening to her because she was so young. And I remember you saying, and eventually I just said, stop. Like, I remember you telling me that eventually I was just like, you stop, like, everybody out, like, because you just can't do it, because no matter your age or your situation or what's going on, it's still your body and your situation, and you're the one experiencing it. So that was just a personal thing that I remember. I don't know how long ago it was or anything like that, but.
No, thanks for bringing that up. That's a crazy memory, and that she was 14. Mm-hmm. And it was quite a long time ago. And the nurses called me. I was working with the hospital program, but I don't remember how I wasn't on. I don't know what happened as far as them actually getting somebody in there. But everyone was just so frustrated with the poor thing, because she was so scared that she was really screaming and yelling. And at one point, apparently tried to kick the doctor. It was really crazy. She was trying to bite people. I don't know. It was really crazy. But it was chaotic, to say the least, but just a lot of fear. And unfortunately, I would never do that, but it was just such a toxic environment that at one point I asked everyone if they would give us some time, and kind of got everybody out of there. She had a mother who was being crazy, and the boyfriend was in there being crazy, and his mother was in there being crazy, and was able to just spend time telling. I just said, just tell me what's going on, and she just cried and said a whole bunch of stuff, and it kind of changed the whole course of the birth. That you were right. She just, nobody was listening to her because they were treating her like a child, even though she was a child, but hey, she's having to grow up. So interesting.
So how did you end up getting involved with that birth?
That was so I was working with the hospital program at the time. There were 3 hospitals in a network, and they had a doula program. So you were on call, whatever days you would give, and you'd be like, okay, I'm on call X number of days, whatever it was. So I think what happened, as I recall, the nurses called the service and said, we know this girl isn't signed up for your service, but is there any way you can get somebody over here, because we need help? Like, this is just going terribly wrong. So I guess I must have just been on call. And then I do remember I wound up doing her cousin's birth. Her cousin was, I think, 16, but shortly after they signed up and requested me, and I wound up doing her cousin's birth later.